Okay, now this video begins our look at empathy. That is, empathy doesn't work. How do you survive in a hostile environment? This is the second of three barriers that we've talked about. The first of those being an addiction to data, the second here being empathy, and the third, the importance of self. Um, Friedman refers to this as the fallacy of empathy, and what he argues is um, that the way in which, or have you ever noticed that the way in which political rhetoric of sensitivity often hijacks agendas? Uh, what he says is that we should not be held responsible for the feelings of others who actually lack the ability to distinguish their feelings from opinions and between a sense of offense and actual harm. Uh, Friedman says that dialogue is only possible when we can learn to distinguish feelings from opinions and recognize that the background or personality of a person is totally irrelevant to the validity of what she or he is saying. Now, empathy is a concept that seems laudable and desirable. And actually, empathy, the word empathy actually came into usage not until 1922, when there was a need to translate a German word in the field of aesthetics, which in Thurlen, I'm not sure if I got that pronunciation right, but it means to feel in. The original intent of the word empathy was to convey how projecting oneself into a work of art, like a painting, a sculpture, theater, something like that, would enable a viewer to appreciate better the creation being observed. And so, really, the word empathy does not appear in the original edition of the Oxford English Dictionary until actually 1931. And after some time, the first editors were either unaware of empathy or thought it was too rarefied or too new to actually include it. Now, the adjective empathetic appears in several psychological essays at the beginning of the 20th century. It's not actually until after World War II that the word empathy itself becomes part of our common usage, as it jumps from the realm of as it jumped from the realm of art appreciation to that of human relationships. Now, what it promised is that projecting one's own person into the skin of another would enable that person to understand the other person more fully, to be more sensitive to their condition, to better appreciate their dilemmas. So, empathy, to feel in, was intended to be an advance over old fashioned concepts such as sympathy or compassion, which actually date way, way back, have a much longer history. What Friedman believes is that the increasing popularity of empathy over the last several decades is symptomatic of the herding or togetherness forces that are characteristic of an anxious society. Now, he's not saying it's not important to be empathetic. What he is saying is that while this concept is important, it's laudable. Um, when empathy becomes a disguise for anxiety, like, for example, a rationalization for the failure to define a position or a power tool in the hands of the sensitive. And this is what he means, those who are most inclined to use the concept of empathy are people who feel powerless and they want to utilize the togetherness forces of a regressed of regression of a regressed society, of a regressed system, to get those whom they perceive to be in power to adapt to them. Now, much of the power actually of this approach is or results from a failure of nerve. That is, a failure of nerve of the leadership. The focus on understanding or feeling with other people can be no less invasive than more coercive approaches. What Friedman argues is that we should rather be focusing on responsibility over empathy. In any relational system, when you have disintegrating or unself regulating forces, invariably they're going to be unresponsive to empathy. By their very nature, they are all take and no give. And in trying to show empathy in such a context, it is akin to Chamberlain trying to understand or reason with Hitler, right? One should not try to reason with a virus. In a similar manner, we should not allow our societies or families to become adapted to their least mature or most dysfunctional members. Perhaps you've heard the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease or gets the oil. No, that cannot be. When we do that, we are adapting to the least functional, the least mature of the system, of the family, of the work environment, whatever the case may be. And in the face of such persons, the self regulation of the leader, whereby they focus on their own needs and those of the group that they lead, should enable them to resist the temptation of that squeaky wheel, right? Feeling for others can be quite a liability in such cases, causing leaders, Friedman says, to lose their nerve. Now, the alternative to the empathetic approach here, as I've described it, is one of promoting responsibility for self in another through challenge. And by focusing upon showing empathy for others, rather than being responsible for our own integrity, we actually decrease others' pain thresholds. And when we decrease someone's pain thresholds, we actually help them to avoid challenge and compromise the mobilization of their health, that is, their nerve. The more empathetic we are, the more we discourage responsibility and growth to maturity. Now, Friedman believes that the increased popularity of empathy, as I've said, is a result of increase in herding, increase in the togetherness forces that are characteristic in our culture today. While feeling for, caring for, and identifying with others are essential in any leader's relationship with others, these things will not themselves encourage people to become more self aware, more responsible, more self regulating, and definitely not more mature. Empathy is, in many respects, a luxury afforded to those who do not have to make tough decisions. Tough decisions, and that's according to what Friedman says, tough decisions are almost invariably decisions whose consequences are painful to others. Note, decisions that leaders make that cause pain in others is not the same as causing harm in others. There is a difference. Painful decisions are not harmful decisions. Empathy can only be afforded when leaders have successfully resisted the invasive character of the kind of the factions that derail necessary development, healthy change. The kind of sensitivity that leaders must require is a sensitivity to the degree of chronic anxiety and the lack of self differentiation in the system that surrounds them. So, a brief word here about empathy, and we'll continue in our conversations of this second barrier with self regulation.